Hello, everyone, and happy Monday. Today we are going to be talking about explicit meaning. Our standard is RL 5.1, and it says, quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. Our learning target. I can quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly. So we're only looking at that part of the standard for this week. So quote accurately. It is when answering questions after reading from a text, it is important to be able to quote accurately from the text. So quote, so you understand what the meaning of quote is. A quote means to repeat or copy out a group of words from a text or speech, typically with an indication that one is not the original author or speaker. So it basically means you're going to take something from the text and you quote it so that you indicate that you are not the one that said those things that you got from the text. So quote, the simple definition of quote. To repeat, something written or said by another person exactly. To write or say the exact words of someone. To write or say a line or short section from a piece of writing or a speech. So explicit textual evidence. What does explicit textual evidence mean? The name really says it all. Explicit means direct. Textual is from the text, and evidence to support for your answer, opinion, or ideas. So explicit textual evidence is basically direct from the text, and you show support for your answer, opinion, or ideas. When you answer explicit questions, that means the answer is right there in the text. So concept, when getting ready to write a quote, these are some good sentence starters. So if someone asks you a question, if your work asks you a question and you want you to take the answer from the text and you're using the exact words from the text, you can write it like this. The text states, I think blank because the text states blank. On page blank, the text states blank. An example is blank. The author wrote blank. I know because the text states blank. According to the text, blank. In the text, it said blank. So these are some good sentence starters. So you're giving credit and saying you're finding your answer exactly from the text. So what are we learning about? To use quotes and direct textual evidence to answer a question. Now, this is very important. That's why it's in bold. So I want you to remember this for later in our lesson. Explicit information means direct or any information stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for doubt. So if you see a question, possibly at the end of this lesson, that asks you what is explicit information, you know to type in direct or any information stated clearly. So explicit information means direct or any information stated clearly. Why is this important? The purpose for being able to use accurate quotes and evidence in a text is so that we can answer questions with support from the text to prove our thinking. So this week we are focusing on the what I read. So if you look at this inference equation, there are three parts to it. What I read is what we're focusing on this week. This is when you use quotes from the text and note page numbers for future reference. So it's what you actually read. And then you're going to For next week we're going to be looking at inferences. And I know we've talked about this before. When you make an inference, you use what you read, what you know, and then you can infer. So this week is basically just focusing on the what I read part. And then we're going to use what I know, which is your background information or knowledge or prior experiences. And then we can put both of these together and we can make an inference. So briefly, I just wanted to pull up some of the questions from this week's reading. I know I've talked about this before, that some of our questions relate to some of the previous skills we have been learning the last few weeks. So not all of our questions are going to be dealing with explicit meaning or explicit information, but there are going to be some questions relating to that. But you can see if you look here and it says, where does this story take place and who is the main characters? This has to do with the skill that we worked on, story elements. Also, I see a question that says, what is Cody's problem in the story? We have already talked about problems and solutions. This sentence right here, it asks, what does this sentence from the text tell you? This is the skill we're working on this week. So some of these questions are going to relate back to some of the previous skills we have been learning. And here are the rest of the questions for this week. I see one that says, what evidence from the text? That goes back to our reasons and evidence. What solution? That has to deal with our problem and solution that we've talked about. So most of these questions you should be able to do using this week's lesson and previous week's lessons to help you answer the question. So a sneak peek for next week, we're going to be making inferences. And remember, when we make inferences, how do readers make inferences? Well, you use 3 steps, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're going to be doing this next week. But we are talking today about number 1. First, think, what does the text tell me? And then number 2, think, what do I already know? And lastly, number 3, think, so what can I infer? So we're going to use these steps to be able to make inferences for next week's lesson. So here's your exit ticket. In the chat box, send to me privately. Number 1, what does explicit or explicit information mean? And number 2, one thing you learned in this lesson. So I would like you to answer both of those questions in the chat box privately to me. And hopefully that this lesson will help you with this week's reading and your questions. And if you have any questions right now would be the time to ask.